The 1960s didn't just invent Saturday mornings, it detonated them. Animation turned kaleidoscopic, rock-driven, and downright dreamlike, flooding living rooms with swirling color, oddball logic, and ideas that felt beamed from another planet. This countdown dives into the trippiest cartoons of the decade, how they startled parents, confused censors, and still rewired pop culture. Buckle up, some of these worlds were never meant for kids. The Mighty Hercules, 1963 to 1966. If you remember the theme song, it's probably already echoing. The Mighty Hercules looked innocent enough, short mythic adventures with a magic ring and a hero built like a marble statue, but the show's mood could get strangely hypnotic. Limited animation became a virtue. Long holds, looping cycles, and stark color blocks gave scenes a dreamlike, almost ritualistic quality. Villains like Daedalus and the Hooded Styx materialized from abstract backgrounds, their designs more symbolic than literal. For a child, that meant myth felt less like history and more like a trance. Controversy came in quieter waves. Parents complained that the ominous visuals and occultish imagery were a bit much for pre-breakfast viewing. Broadcasters, wary of frightening the youngest viewers, nudged tone down in scheduling and promos, while moral watch groups grumbled about dark magic as a weekly plot device. In syndication, stations occasionally trimmed moments of peril, lingering shots of monsters or prolonged hypnotic spells to meet evolving standards. Yet the cultural imprint endured. Hercules helped normalize mythic fantasy on weekday TV and foreshadowed the decade's taste for alternative realities. Its aesthetic, graphic, repetitive, and icon-heavy feels proto-psychedelic, like a pop art poster come to life. The show wouldn't pass today as educational, and its stark menace might be shuffled to a later hour. But in the 1960s, it cracked open the door. Heroic cartoons could be strange, ritualized, and a little eerie, setting up everything from cosmic superheroes to truly out-there space sagas later in the decade. Journey to the Center of the Earth, 1967 to 1969. Hanna-Barbera's spin on Jules Verne turned exploration into a weekly descent through luminous caverns and uncanny ecosystems. The show's palette, electric blues, volcanic reds, emerald caverns, felt less natural than hallucinatory, while subterranean flora waved like they had their own agenda. Backgrounds drifted toward abstraction, crystalline grottos with impossible geometry, tunnels that spiraled like optical illusions, and creatures that looked sculpted from neon glass. For controversy, the danger factor loomed biggest. Parents and local affiliates balked at episodes where the heroes faced suffocation, brain-warping spores, or creatures designed more to unsettle than to thrill. Standards and practices memos pushed for quicker cutaways from distress, and some reruns lost seconds of lingering peril to meet stricter guidelines. Educational advocates bristled too. Kids watched a title lifted from literature morph into planetarium fever dreams with scant science. Culturally, the series nailed the decade's vibe. The Earth itself became a head trip. The show amplified the era's fascination with inner space, psychedelia's belief that the strangest journeys happen inside. Later, fantasy cartoons borrowed the grammar, glowing fissures, echoing corridors, monsters that read like metaphors. Would it air unchanged today? Unlikely. Between the unrelenting peril and disorienting visuals, networks might slap on content advisories or shuffle it to a niche streamer. But in the late 60s, this subterranean saga taught young audiences a radical lesson. Wonder and unease often share the same tunnel. Space Ghost, 1966 to 1968. Before Space Ghost became late-night irony, he was pure, unfiltered cosmic menace and majesty. Alex Toth's razor-clean designs, masked faces, and inky star fields gave the series a stark, graphic power. Villains weren't merely crooks, they were manifestations. Cyclo's whirring eye, Zorik's insectoid glare, Brack's feral grin. episodes unfolded like pop art tarot cards under a blacklight, with color bursts and void-heavy compositions that felt, yes, psychedelic. Controversy arrived via intensity. The violence was mild by today's standards, but the mood, abduction plots, void prisons, villains that hissed through the screen, spooked some parents. Stations occasionally trimmed stasis ray sequences and prolonged cliffhangers to reduce dread for younger viewers. Sensors flagged trapped with no escape setups, asking for swifter rescues and fewer torture device close-ups. None of this dulled the chill. The show thrived on negative space, letting imaginations color in the darkness. Culturally, Space Ghost proved that Saturday morning could look like modern art. It influenced a generation of designers and later superhero cartoons, showing that minimalism plus bold color could hit harder than hyperdetail. Its revival as a surreal talk show host decades later worked because the original already felt like a midnight transmission, deadpan, stylized, eerie. Would it air unchanged for kids now? Maybe not without disclaimers. That floating cosmic silence, punctured by alien cackles and jagged energy beams, still feels more art gallery hallucination than playground romp. And that's the point. The Impossibles, 1966 to 1968. A rock trio that moonlights as superheroes sounds goofy until the visuals kick in. The Impossibles smashed two 60s obsessions, bands and powers, into a pinball machine of elastic physics. Scenes whip-pan across neon stages into battlefields where instruments morph into gadgets. Perspective snaps like a rubber band, and villains are designed as moving puns. Paper-thin slicers, geometry-obsessed masterminds, living contraptions that looked doodled in a caffeine rush. Controversies were twofold. Some parents griped about cartoon violence grafted onto pop idol appeal. Standards people pushed for fewer imitable stunts and faster cutaways from impact. Others bristled at the show's delirious logic. Idols vanishing via hidden trapdoors, guitars weaponizing, reality folding to beat drops. Networks complied with small trims in reruns, shortened fight loops, toned-down crushing machine gags, and dialogue swaps that framed danger as slapstick. Cultural impact, though, was lasting. The show previewed the music superhero mashup that would echo into countless kid franchises. Its kinetic editing and elastic space mirrored the decade's concert posters and liquid light shows, teaching kids a new grammar. Rhythm can bend reality. Too strange for kids today? Not in concept, super bands still sell, but the execution is unabashedly trippy. The visual puns, relentless momentum, and physics-optional chases feel like a cartoon trying to keep up with a drum solo. Thrilling, disorienting, and one guitar slide away from a kaleidoscope. Wacky Races, 1968 to 1970. On paper, a simple road race. On screen, a psychedelic derby through landscapes that behaved like characters. Each car was a surreal manifesto, the creepy coupe with its brooding dragon, the buzzwagon's log-rolling chaos, the convert-a-car's identity crises. Backgrounds morphed from peppermint deserts to checkerboard hills, and the sky often looked less like weather and more like a mood ring. Controversy? Less moral panic, more standards finesse. Crashes were constant, so sensors insisted on instant bounce-backs, no injuries, no consequences, turning catastrophe into choreography. Some stations snipped prolonged pileups or tightened sabotage gags by Dick Dastardly to minimize imitable mischief. A few educators sniffed at the show's win-by-trickery ethos, while parents occasionally complained about relentless peril, even if everyone popped up smiling seconds later. Culturally, Wacky Races became a template for the anarchic ensemble comedy and for games, toys, and later racing franchises that treat vehicles as personalities. Its impact is everywhere, from toy aisles to multiplayer racers, because it fused speed with surreal design thinking. Would it air unchanged for kids now? The core would, but you'd likely see disclaimers about "don't try this," and perhaps gentler tweaks to the nastier pranks. What makes it too strange is its cheerful denial of physics. Roads coil, cliffs reset, and contraptions bloom with impossible features. The show paints motion like music, one wild riff after another, and asks kids to keep up. The Herculoids, 1967 to 1969. Few Saturday morning cartoons looked as alien as the Herculoids. Designed by Alex Toth, this Hanna-Barbera oddity followed a family and their bizarre creatures on the planet Amzot. The beasts themselves, Gloop and Gleep, the shape-shifting blobs, Igu, a stone, Giant, Zoc, a dragon with laser eyes, were living abstractions, designed less as animals and more as primal forms of energy and texture. The show played like a living psychedelic poster, each battle unfolding across skies and landscapes painted in impossible hues. Controversy stemmed from intensity. Parents complained about the unsettling imagery of molten monsters and grotesque invaders, and watchdog groups fretted that the endless laser blasts and destruction normalized violence. Networks asked animators to tone down certain graphic sequences, trimming extended creature battles and muting some sound effects to dampen the menace. Still, the eerie mood remained intact, half adventure, half hallucination. Culturally, the Herculoids resonated as proto-environmental allegory. Humans and creatures united to defend a fragile planet, a theme that dovetailed with late 60s anxieties about ecology and technology. Its designs influenced later sci-fi animation, inspiring generations of artists who admired its bold embrace of abstraction. Would it air unchanged now? Likely not without edits. Its stark alien menace might earn fantasy peril labels. Yet the show's strangeness is its point. It painted the cosmos as a psychedelic battleground where shapes, colors, and sounds fought for survival. The Beatles, 1965 to 1969. At first glance, the Beatles cartoon seemed harmless, animated mop-tops mugging through slapstick adventures. But by its later seasons, the visuals tipped into full-blown psychedelia. Dream sequences flooded with kaleidoscopic backdrops, characters bent like rubber under guitar riffs, and episodes mirrored the band's real-world shift into surreal territory. Even before Yellow Submarine, the show foreshadowed the Beatles' Technicolor reinvention. Controversy was both cultural and parental. Purists accused the cartoon of trivializing the band's music, reducing Lennon and McCartney to caricatures with wacky accents. Parents sometimes wrote to stations claiming the show's bizarre gags and surreal visuals confused younger children. Censors occasionally objected to caricatured villains or political undertones, trimming dialogue that hinted too close at satire. By the late 60s, the band itself distanced from the cartoon, feeling it didn't reflect their evolving image. Culturally, the series was crucial. It introduced Beatles songs to global youth, turning TV into a jukebox of animated music videos. The psychedelic imagery shaped how audiences visualized pop music, laying the foundation for MTV a generation later. Would it air unchanged today? Perhaps, but with disclaimers for dated caricatures and cultural stereotypes. What remains undeniable is its boldness. The show treated music as a portal into alternate realities, blurring lines between cartoon gags and visual hallucinations. The Banana Splits Adventure Hour, 1968 to 1970. Meet Fleagle, Bingo, Drooper, and Snorky, the Banana Splits. On the surface, this live-action animated hybrid looked like goofy costumed animals hosting skits. But for children, the frenetic pacing, disjointed animation, inserts, and jangling pop-rock theme songs created a sensory overload that bordered on psychedelic performance art. Between segments, the Splits careened through surreal chase scenes on tricycles, often set against carnival-colored backdrops that looked less like sets and more like hallucinations. Controversy arrived almost immediately. Parents found the Splits' manic antics overstimulating, some describing the show as chaotic nonsense. Standards reviewers raised eyebrows at the violent slapstick in animated segments like The Arabian Nights or Danger Island, where characters endured peril after peril with surreal gags. Critics wondered if the show's frenetic editing style encouraged hyperactivity. In syndication, broadcasters softened the loudest sound effects and trimmed a few particularly intense slapstick gags. Culturally, though, the splits became iconic. Their theme song lingered for decades, their imagery resurfaced in cult horror reinterpretations, and their combination of live-action absurdity with trippy cartoons became a 60s time capsule. Today, the Banana Splits read like pure psychedelia for kids. Music, costumes, and chaos thrown in a blender. Too strange? Maybe. But that strangeness is precisely what kept them unforgettable. Spider-Man, 1967 to 1970. While Spider-Man's comic book origins were grounded in urban grit, his 1967 cartoon swung into something stranger. Limited budgets forced animators to lean on psychedelic shortcuts. Swirling, abstract backgrounds replaced cityscapes, kaleidoscopic skies rotated behind battles, and entire episodes dissolved into static montages while Spidey swung endlessly across looping skylines. The result? A superhero adventure that often looked like a fever dream. Controversy came from both sides. Parents worried the show's darker villains, like the alien Mysterio or monstrous Manwolf, were too frightening, while kids complained about confusing, disorienting visuals in reruns. Censors flagged episodes for frightening imagery and trimmed prolonged hypnosis sequences or lingering shots of monstrous transformations. Later seasons, produced with even tighter budgets, leaned harder into stock psychedelic effects, which critics at the time dismissed as lazy animation. Yet culturally, this weirdness defined Spider-Man's TV presence. The swirling skies and psychedelic battles embedded him in the 1960s counterculture, aligning superheroes with pop art and underground comic aesthetics. And, of course, it birthed the endlessly memed Spider-Man pointing and surreal screenshots that thrive online today. Would it air unchanged now? Possibly, but mostly as camp. Its strangeness wasn't intentional artistry. It was survival under budget cuts. Yet the end result gave us one of the strangest, most psychedelic superheroes ever broadcast to kids. Cool McCool, 1966 to 1969. Norman Maurer's Cool McCool was a spy spoof in the middle of the 60s espionage craze, but its warped visuals set it apart. McCool bumbled through cases in a world of flat planes, pastel explosions, and villains like the Owl or Hurricane Harry, who felt sketched from surreal pop art posters. The character designs were jagged and minimalist, giving every scene an uncanny, almost unfinished quality that kids found either hypnotic or unsettling. Controversy orbited its tone. Parents wrote in about negative role models, a spy hero so incompetent he often caused more chaos than villains. Networks trimmed a handful of violent gags, missiles, falling traps, exaggerated electrocutions to soften its edge. Critics at the time were baffled. Was it parody for adults or nonsense for kids? That in-betweenness made it an easy target for dismissal and later cult rediscovery. Culturally, Cool McCool mirrored the psychedelic poster art blooming in music clubs with its eccentric villains and jagged geometry. While it only ran 2 seasons, its DNA resurfaced in every bumbling anti-hero cartoon that followed. Too strange for kids? At the time, yes, its minimalist world read more like an art school parody than Saturday morning fluff. Today, it's remembered as a surreal time capsule, proof that even kids' cartoons weren't immune to the decade's psychedelic infection. The Adventures of Gumby, 1960s revival episodes. Gumby wasn't born in the 60s, but his revival episodes during the decade fully embraced psychedelic sensibilities. Art Clokey's claymation already felt surreal. Characters morphed, bent, and reformed like dream matter. In the 60s, episodes leaned harder into trippy backdrops, paper-thin portals, neon-colored landscapes, and dream logic where Gumby slipped in and out of books, dimensions, and strange physics-defying realities. Controversy stemmed from the unsettling tone. Parents described Gumby as creepy rather than charming, and some affiliates aired episodes sparingly, claiming the dreamlike plots frightened sensitive children. Critics also pointed out the violent slapstick, Pokey stretched, Gumby flattened, villains twisted in bizarre ways that made the show stranger than typical Saturday morning fare. Religious groups occasionally raised eyebrows at the occultish themes of dimensional travel, labeling it inappropriate mysticism for kids. Culturally, Gumby carved out a space as the claymation pioneer of psychedelia. His morphing body became a metaphor for the era's obsession with fluid identity and shifting realities. The 60s episodes influenced experimental animators and remain cult favorites for their eerie, elastic weirdness. Would it air today unchanged? Likely on niche platforms as retro oddities. Too strange for mainstream kids' blocks, Gumby's psychedelic revival stands as a reminder. Sometimes the simplest clay figure can embody the strangest dreams. Super President, 1967 to 1968. Of all the 60s oddities, Super President may be the most bizarre. The premise: the sitting U.S. president moonlights as a superhero, using powers like super strength and the ability to transform his body into different substances. Animated with stark, almost abstract backdrops and echoing narration, the show often felt like a fever dream where politics met psychedelia head-on. Controversy was immediate and fierce. Critics blasted the idea of politicizing superheroes, with some newspapers labeling it irresponsible indoctrination. Parents questioned whether mixing presidential authority with cartoon violence sent confusing messages. Broadcasters were pressured to cut certain episodes featuring nuclear threats, and censors trimmed visual sequences that leaned into grotesque transformations. The backlash was so strong that the show lasted barely one season before cancellation. Culturally, however, Super President is unforgettable. It mirrored the decade's paranoia, blending Cold War anxieties with surreal superheroics. For kids, it was baffling. For adults, it was alarming. Too strange for kids? Absolutely. The psychedelic abstraction of power, combined with overt political messaging, made it one of the most controversial cartoons of its time. Today, it survives as a cult curiosity, remembered less for its heroics and more for its sheer audacity. Yellow Submarine, 1968. Although technically a feature film, Yellow Submarine aired frequently on television, embedding itself into children's Saturday viewing. Its psychedelic visuals remain unmatched: seas of holes, blue meanies, marching music, and kaleidoscopic sequences that dissolved reality into pure color and rhythm. To a child, it felt like tumbling through a never-ending dream, scored by the Beatles' most experimental tracks. Controversy emerged as parents and educators complained that the surreal imagery was unsuitable for children. Its abstract sequences, particularly the marching blue meanies and disorienting kaleidoscope transitions, were criticized for being too frightening or nonsensical. Some broadcasters edited down sequences, trimming the darker or most hypnotic moments. Critics, meanwhile, debated whether it was truly for children at all, or a countercultural art piece disguised as a cartoon. Culturally, Yellow Submarine became the definitive psychedelic cartoon. It influenced animation worldwide, inspired music videos, and proved that cartoons could function as avant-garde art. Would it air unchanged today? Likely, but framed as a cult classic rather than a kids' movie. Its brilliance lies in its strangeness. Rather than dilute psychedelia for children, it immersed them fully, leaving viewers, young and old, forever altered. Fantastic Planet, 1968, short/1973 film. Before it became a full-length film in the 70s, Fantastic Planet circulated as a late 60s French short. Its imagery, giant blue humanoids, humans treated as pets, surreal floating landscapes, was unlike anything else in animation. For children stumbling across it on television or festival reels, it was disturbing and unforgettable. Its pacing was slow, its creatures abstract, and its landscapes looked like melting biology textbooks under neon light. Controversy was inevitable. Parents called it nightmare fuel, and some screenings drew criticism for exposing children to unsettling allegories about oppression, death, and survival. Broadcasters that aired the early short often scheduled it late at night or paired it with experimental film programming, implicitly acknowledging its strangeness. Censors flagged disturbing visuals, humans crushed underfoot, surreal execution devices as excessive for younger audiences. Culturally, it became a touchstone of psychedelic animation, bridging European avant-garde with countercultural American youth. Its influence stretched into album covers, underground comics, and even sci-fi cinema. Too strange for kids? Completely. But in its strangeness, it seeded generations of artists who saw that animation didn't have to soothe, it could confront and provoke. That tension remains its enduring legacy. The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1968 to 1969. At number 1, The Strangest, a hybrid series where live-action Huck, Tom, and Becky wandered into animated worlds. Each episode dropped the kids into bizarre landscapes, psychedelic deserts, villain-infested castles, and distorted versions of folklore, where live-action figures ran among cartoon monsters. The effect was surreal, flesh and blood children trapped inside living hallucinations. Controversy followed quickly. Parents complained that Huck and his friends faced too much peril: giant snakes, sorcerers, surreal villains with grotesque designs. Censors trimmed certain scenes for syndication, especially those with prolonged danger or frightening imagery. Critics at the time dismissed it as too weird for children, unable to reconcile live-action innocence with cartoon surrealism. The show's single season reflected the difficulty of sustaining such a strange experiment. Culturally, though, it became iconic. Its hybrid format influenced later shows that blended live action with animation. Its surreal visuals and bizarre villains echoed the psychedelic era's obsession with bending reality. Too strange for kids? Absolutely. But that was its genius. It showed that television could be a laboratory for new forms, even if the experiment bewildered its youngest viewers. These 15 cartoons remind us that the 1960s were an era when television dared to be strange. Psychedelic art and sound slipped into children's shows, often sparking controversy but leaving behind cultural legends. If you enjoyed this dive into the bizarre, hit like, subscribe, and share. More hidden worlds await.